Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks so much for this invitation, Sepideh, and everybody also for last week's session, which was extremely helpful. So I actually have a paper, which is something that for me, I don't usually do because it's extremely hard to write, but somehow I had to do it. So it's a written thing, and I don't have any slides. So just please bear with me. But anybody, please feel free to ask questions while I'm reading. If you want me to clarify something, or you just have something that comes to you, your interventions are most welcome. Okay, Deciphering Social Dissonance. And this is a quote by Sylvia Wynter from her text Reconsidering Aesthetics Towards a Deciphering Practice from 1992. A deciphering practice is therefore part of the attempt to move beyond our present human science to that of a new science of human forms of life and the correlated modes of the aesthetic, to move beyond what Adorno defined in the wake of Auschwitz as that evil which still haunts human existence as the world's owns and freedoms. As you will see, I will take some of the material that we used last week, but it'll be trying to deal more specific with a notion of social dissonance and some of the questions that I got since last year. So the attempt to decipher social dissonance is to understand how it functions in the overall ideological structures that continue to reproduce the existing conditions. Social dissonance attempts to understand what is it that we mean by a human in the current society and how it relates to structural forms of unfreedom. Social dissonance takes as a starting point Leon Festinger's theory of cognitive dissonance, which is when a person has two contradictory cognitions or when there is a discrepancy between what a person thinks and what this person does. Social dissonance is a cognitive dissonance at the structural level that has to do with the contradiction between the values that we have in liberal democracies, individual freedom, equality, democracy, and sustainability, and what we actually do, which is to reproduce a system based on exploitation, inequality, and freedom, and the destruction of the earth through its extraction for profit. Festinger tells us that we constantly look for justifications as a way to ease the dissonance. What are the justifications for social dissonance and the perpetuation of this system? I argue that there is a structural justification that relies on the liberal conception of the subject. This structural justification has to do with what Mark Fisher called capitalist realism, which is perfectly crystallized in Jameson's expression that it's easier to imagine the end of the world rather than the end of capitalism. In the aftermath of the defeat of May 68 and with the fall of the Berlin Wall, the sense that there is no other possible alternative to the capitalist mode of production and that we are in the best possible system has gained a lot of prominence, as to the point that we think that this is the only way in which we can live. This idea has been fermented for a long time, and it has its roots in certain realizations within leftist debates. A few of them are, in the 1940s, in Germany, the realization after the majority of the proletariat supported the Nazis, that the state in conjunction with capital could perpetuate this system forever. Frederick Pollock's essay on state capitalism was immensely important for the Frankfurt School and critical theory. Adorno's, for example, notion of total domination is certainly influenced by this. On the French side, there is the influence of Althusser's Spinozist reading of production as an inherent force where there is no longer a differentiation between cause and effect, where it is no longer possible to understand the superstructure, the ideas and production of consciousness, and simple effects emanating from or reflecting the conflict between forces and relations of production. This monist understanding of production that leaves behind the Hegelian dialectics influenced greatly post-structural thinkers like Deleuze and Guattari's formulation regarding the immanence of desire to all social relations, or Foucault's assertion regarding the immanence of power to subjectivity and knowledge. And I think this post-structuralist legacy has still influence to even people like Mark Fisher and others. And then on the Marxist tradition, there is a problematic understanding of Marxist concept of real subsumption. Originally for Marx, subsumption is the process of the objectification of labor and in its commodification. And real subsumption is the process by which the social relations of production penetrate the labor process itself. Is when you, like, for example, so basically Marx makes a differentiation between formal and real subsumption. And formal subsumption is when capitalism gets hold of existing production processes, let's say farming, and then it introduces wages. But in real subsumption, the whole mode of production is made with the idea of producing value. So all scientific development and technological developments are implemented in the mode of production. But here, there was a conflation, basically, and this has to do from, basically an understanding that it occurred a lot. Well, it has to do also with the translation, that early on, the translations of Marx of this, the missing sixth chapter, where it's called of Capital, is that subsumption got translated as domination. So it wasn't, in French and Italian for some time, real subsumption got translated as real domination. So this actually helped to get an understanding of real subsumption for people like Tony Negri and Jack Hamat, among others, that real subsumption was the subsumption of the whole of society. Also in Italy, a precursor of this was Mario Tronti's notion of the social factory. Once again, where the whole of society becomes part of the production process. The feeling of total capture by capital has been accelerated by social media and artificial intelligence into what Reza Negarestani has recently called algorithmic subsumption, which is when any form of our interaction in social media becomes valorized. So historically, there has been many expressions that attempt to describe the totalizing powers of capitalism through different concepts and terms: reification, ideology, hegemony, false consciousness, social synthesis, society of the spectacle. These concepts have different nuances and understandings, but what they have in common is that they attempt to understand the relationship between forms of thought and social forms, and how the latter determines the former. Often these ideas have helped to generate a fatalistic view that had led us to a catastrophic sense of the end of history, where capital has all the power and where we are trapped in it forever. But this is a theoretical fallacy. Capitalism only subsumes particular labor processes concretely in specific moments. Some of the difficulties that we find ourselves have to do with what the philosopher Ray Brassier has called the antinomy of class and struggle, and I quote him. Labor's victories consolidate capital's monopolization of social wealth. The strengthening of its influence upon capital is also the weakening of its challenge to capital. Since labor's ultimate interest is the abolition of capital, winning better wages and working conditions is a short-term gain that diminishes the prospect of a long-term victory. So how can we, end of quote, how can we intervene in a reality that is dominated by commodity exchange without reproducing it? In order to answer this question, we need to identify the level of intervention that is dominated by capitalist relations. Social dissonance is a practical theoretical attempt at understanding how social forms determines forms of thought by concretely exploring how we are produced as subjects. By doing this, we can better understand what is our room for maneuver. This requires understanding our freedom and deciphering the liberal understanding of freedom and of the subject. Precisely because the horizon of a structural change seems to be foreclosed, we accept the minimal freedoms that liberal democracies offer to us. But this leads us to the roots of social dissonance, the conflation of the individual, the self, with the subject. As individuals in liberal societies, we are made to believe that we are already subjects with the capacity for self-determination and agency, even though this agency is minimal. Social dissonance is then the noise that exists between the model that we have about ourselves and the reality that constantly undermines this and disturbs this model. Just a second, please. Odita, ¿tienes la puerta abierta? Odita, Odita, cierra la ventana, por favor. Es que estoy aquí en una charla. Sorry about that. So in this text, I will attempt to decipher social dissonance by taking into account some questions that I got so far. And I will focus on two, and maybe the other two we can discuss in the questions. So yeah, the first two questions are how social dissonance differ from other concepts, such as ideology and hegemony, and what is the difference between social dissonance and the Lacanian split subject that I got last week from Laura. The other two questions, just for you to know, is social dissonance only a form of demystification of enlightening false consciousness? Is only happening at the level of reasoning? And the fourth question is that social dissonance can be seen, or the noise that we engage, as a form of elitism that is not connected to other political struggles because it's part of an art project or a musical score. So the first question, okay, so how does social dissonance differ from other concepts such as ideology and hegemony? This question I got in a presentation in Tilburg last autumn. So according to Zizek, the function of ideology is not to offer us a point of escape from our reality, but to offer us the social reality itself as an escape from some traumatic real kernel. So social dissonance is the noise that ideology cannot suppress because it punctures our coherent idea of selfhood. Here, ideology is understood not as false consciousness or an illusion in the Marxist sense that they don't know, but they're doing it. Instead, Zizek offers us a cynical conception of ideology as proposed by Sloterdijk, which is they know very well what they're doing, but they are doing it. I will say that we are no longer at this cynical moment, but rather in a catastrophic one, because liberalism cannot longer hold its promises. And this has catastrophic consequences for us when we are under the threat of climate change. Our idea of the individual is both accelerating and disintegrating, for example, through social media and artificial intelligence. What we are is up for grabs, but without a clear horizon for the future, reactionary ideology is taking over. People with fear are enclosing themselves by naturalizing notions like the state, race, family, and gender, trying to find some sense of security and stability, some sense of identity. The question is how ideology can appear to us, offer us coherent views in the midst of such a dissonance and contradictions. This can be answered with what Shaum Mehra calls social synthesis, which is the network of relations by which society forms a coherent whole. As social forms develop and change, so does also the synthesis, which holds together the multiplicity of links operating between men according to the division of labor. Okay, so social synthesis is that holds together the forms of thought and the social forms. And ideology seems to be that kind of glue. It produces the justifications in Festinger sense and suppresses the dissonances. How we think and how we make sense of ourselves and reality is what produces the glue that holds things together there, and what gets rid of the tension by generating a narrative that makes sense somehow. This is very close, so these understandings of ideology, to what Sylvia Wynter has called the semantic closure principle. Because, and then I quote, because it is a function of the securing of the modest of social cohesion based on the inducing of culture-specific cooperative behaviors on the part of its human subjects, the phenomenon of aesthetics and its discursive semantic practice or rhetoric strategies by means of whose meaning signals such inter-altruistic behaviors are stably induced must be governed by rules at the level of human forms of life that are analogous to the rules which govern the securing of cooperative coherence at the level of organic life. Rules which must all function, therefore, according to the semantic closure principle, which alone ensures such a coherence. For Wynter, the semantic closure principle is what allows a governing code of symbolic life and death, and its related criterion of good life or evil death. The semantic closure principle is close to ideology insofar as it allows us to produce the narratives about ourselves and our ideals based on a certain logic of exception. And Zizek explains about this exception. Every ideological universal, for example, freedom, equality, is false insofar as it necessarily includes a specific case which breaks its unity, lays open its falsity. Freedom, for example, a universal notion comprising a number of species, freedom of speech and of press, freedom of consciousness, freedom of commerce, of political freedom, and so on, but also by means of a structural necessity, a specific freedom, that of the worker to sell his own labor on the market, which subverts this universal notion. That is to say, this freedom is the very opposite of effective freedom. By selling his labor freely, the worker loses his freedom. The real content of this free act of sale is the worker's enslavement to capital. The crucial point is, of course, that it is precisely this paradoxical freedom, the form of its opposite, which closes the circle of bourgeois freedoms. End of quote. So ideology operates as a complex and elusive web of attitudes and underlying, almost instinctive assumptions that form an essential part of sustaining various non-ideological activities, such as the economic, legal, the political, and sexual practices. Suppose ideologies is the almost spontaneous belief that holds the difficult relation between cognition and reality. In that case, hegemony is when a class uses ideology in order to generate a common sense and a worldview, which gives them political, intellectual, and moral power over other classes. Gramsci attempted to articulate what he called the hegemony of the proletariat, and I quote, ideology, in this case, is instrumentalized by a class to achieve hegemony. However, thinking of a proletarian hegemony these days seems incredibly difficult, since the economic powers have turned the general common sense to the right and increasingly to the extreme right. By deciphering social dissonance, that is, to understand the noise in ideology, we can perceive the residues that hegemony is trying to exclude. The function of ideology in hegemony is to convince us that we can perceive, sorry, the function of ideology in hegemony is to convince us that reality not only makes sense, but it is the only possible reality. Social dissonance is the resonance of the failures of neoliberal hegemony that compel us to change this reality. Okay, and then the second question. I think I'm going much faster than I expected. Anyway. What is the difference between the Lacanian split subject and social dissonance? Which is a question that I got last week. So once again, Zizek says, in Lacanian theory, the subject is nothing but the impossibility of its own signifying representation. The empty place opened up in the big other by the failure of this representation. We can now see how meaningless is the usual reproach according to which Hegelian dialectics sublates all the inert objective left over, including it in the circle of the dialectical mediation. The very movement of dialectics implies, on the contrary, that there is always a certain remnant, a certain leftover, escaping the circle of subjectivation, of subjective appropriation, mediation, and the subject is precisely correlative to the leftover, to the bird S, which is this leftover which resists the bird subject, which is the split subject. The leftover which resists subjectivation embodies the impossibility which is the subject. In other words, the subject is strictly correlative to its own impossibility. Its limits, its positive condition. Kind of the word. So for Lacan, the subject is denoted by this bird subject, the bird S, capital S, the crossed blocked S, a void, an empty place in the signifier's structure. The question is whether this is always the case or if this can be changed. For Zizek, as we have seen, dialectics has always a negative reminder. The following question is whether this leads us to an ahistorical account of the subject that will always be alienated because there will always be this negative reminder. I got also this criticism in the book of perhaps falling into an ahistorical account of alienation, because I say that it's not possible to overcome alienation totally. And my answer was to describe that there was different forms of alienation through language, which is extremely important for Lacanian psychoanalysis, technology, the model of selfhood, which all are mediated through the engagement in commodity production. What will happen once we get rid of capitalist estrangement? Will we have to deal with other forms of alienation? I would say yes, but we'll have to deal with them collectively, which will be very different. In the revolutionary process of overcoming commodity production, capital and the state, we will engage in a process of self-abolition, where our current conception of subjectivity will radically change. Once we gain the collective reappropriation of all our alienated social powers that has been alienated by capital, we will be able to reconsider our model of selfhood and subjectivity. While it is too early to say whether the subject will continue to be this empty place in the signifier structure, it is most likely that a different language will need to be developed, one that might be one that might get rid of some of the psychoanalysis insights, or one that might render some of the psychoanalysis insights obsolete. I don't know to what extent, but certainly, yeah, it will change. So we experience the world as in line with the predictions of our internal model. The Lacanian subject assumes a void in our model, that these subjects could never be part of the signifier structures. Social dissonance does not make this claim, and is specific to this historical time, insofar as it is the noise that exists between our internal model and the capitalist reality. Social dissonance are the traces of unfreedoms of liberal subjectivity. Its negativity can be overcome by abolishing the capitalist mode of production, I would like to reconsider social dissonance and our understanding of the subject, taking into consideration predictive processing. Predictive processing is a multidisciplinary theoretical framework that integrates cognition, perception, attention, and action. The basic premise is that our brain not only produces content based on sensory data, but also anticipates it in relation to established models. Through a hierarchical structure, top-down expectations of a model receive bottom-up sensory data, which is processed in relation to whether it matches the model or not. This means that the brain is constantly predicting the incoming flow of sensory data, forming expectations of what the perceiver should, how the perceiver should observe in the world. The brain, similarly to cognitive dissonance, continually tries to reduce the dissonance between the expectations and the sensory data. It resists by reducing uncertainty concerning a hypothesis, thus saving neurocomputational costs. This means that we are constantly subjected to our own expectations. Modeling is an essential aspect of the predictive processing philosophy. In order to generate predictions about the world, the brain constructs models or representations of the world based on the past experiences and current sensory input. Predictive processing models describes how the brain generates prediction based on probabilistic representations of the world and how it updates these representations to account for the new sensory input. However, predictive processing also goes beyond traditional modeling approaches by emphasizing the active role of the brain in generating and testing predictions. In predictive processing, the brain actively seeks out sensory information that will confirm or disconfirm predictions. This active exploration and testing of predictions allow the brain to refine its model and improve its predictions over time. There is a specific model that I would like to focus on, particularly is important with the way that we conceive ourselves, which is our self model. And this is Thomas Metzinger, like what we mentioned last week, and has been very important for me to deal with what I call alienation from below, which is the way that our brain generates a self-model in which we based our selfhood, which is, it starts with a neurocomputational mechanisms, but it necessarily necessitates from whatever output is there, which is this society has to do with our engagement in the capitalist mode of production. So how does this model works, or what does it need? Of course, there is, and then I'm quoting Thomas Metzinger, talking about M autonomy, which is the mental autonomy, which is kind of the minimal kind of threshold of agency that exists in the brain. Of course, there is no such a thing as narrative self. Our inner life narrative has no author, no mysterious self behind the self that could function as the narrator. It too emerges out of a continuous process of dynamic self-organization and social interaction, leading to an ever-changing autobiographical self-model. But the process just sketched has an important phenomenological effect. When autobiographical memory begins to consolidate, a strong hyper prior for autonomy and moral responsibility is already firmly established. We believe and automatically predict that we and others have the capacity for better and ultimate origination, because it has always been like that since we can remember. We are embodied models of our early social environment. Our phenomenal self-model reflects implicit expectations of our primordial sociocultural needs and says that we have always been autonomous, morally responsible agents. This robust self-related hyper prior has been installed early through highly reliable social feedback, and it is a major factor in determining the phenomenology of self-consciousness and autonomy. So Metzinger allow us to identify our most minimal account of agency and autonomy, which is always culturally and socially constructed. The issue at hand is, could this model be radically different once we get rid of the narrative of self? What I'm proposing here is what I call open source subjectivity. This conception of subjectivity will allow us to deal with the models, technologies, and material conditions collectively. We will no longer have to deal with the dissonance individually. Rather, we will be able to understand the sociogenic construction of social dissonance. And sociogenic, I think I mentioned last week, but I explain again, is the way Sylvia Wynter uses, taking it Frantz Fanon notion of sociogeny, which has to do with the forms of alienation that Black Caribbeans had when they were in France. And Fanon, which was a psychologist, was also studying Freud, and Freud had this notion of ontogeny, to trying to understand the way that a human develops from its birth, and it's like the study of the inception of an organism from its beginning in biology, but Freud took it into psychology to understand whether some traumas comes from early kind of traumatic events in the child. Fanon understood that the form of alienations that the Black Caribbeans had in France could not be understood at the individual level. They had to be understood socially and taking into consideration slavery and colonization. And Wynter uses this notion of sociogenic construction as the way that we have developed a narrative about who can be a human and who cannot be a human, about humans who can decide who between death and death and life. So I read Sylvia Wynter. So a deciphering practice rejection of the ontocentric definition of the human, and therefore of the Cartesian and Darwinian premises of any purpose given to humans by nature, rather than by the discursive neurochemical signaling systems by which we are instituted as meta-organic form of life, proposes that human purposes, like the modes of the subject of sociogeny, which are the correlate, are also to be seen as alterable to the extent that they have proved to be inconsiderate both for the human species and as a whole, witness to the ongoing deterioration of the set of conditions of the planetary environment by means in which the species alone is viable, and most directly for the concrete individual subjects of the jobless archipelagos, for the Ivans, for the Ramins, for all the pariahs. So for Sylvia Wynter, deciphering is a practice that reveals the modes of the subject and the rules of functioning, rather than merely replicating and perpetuating these rules, and undermines the autonomy of human cognition with respect to the reality of social universes. Deciphering social dissonance, then, is about dealing with the noise that emerges between the complicity of our current conceptions of the subject, including the psychoanalytic one, and the reproduction of the existing system. And yeah, and this is the paper that I had. I guess it's quite, yeah, it took less than I expected. I don't know, maybe if you have some questions that we can start with, maybe if not, I can then try to deal in an informal way with the two other points or questions that Hamburg and Lick. Ah, okay. Oh wow. Oh yeah. So there's a question here. Do you mind, Daniel, to maybe say the comment aloud, or should I read it?
Yeah, my accent is not very good. I'd rather do it in Spanish, and I'll do both. I'm working on Lukács reification on the reading given by Andrew Finger and Michael Thompson, and I'm interested in the notion of the incompatibility between partial systems. And Lukács' history of class consciousness talks or gives hints about just the incompatibility between stratas of being that are rationalized, and that is comes from a reading of neo-Kantian sources, in specific the notion of form of objectivity or Gegenständlichkeitsform form, and it's more reduced and more precise use than the omniabarcant and totalizing notion of reification, which Lukács is known for. And the second point is that the later Lukács ontology is more restrained or more restricted in his use of reification, and it is used to give account of the subjective experience of the impossibility for self-actualization given by objective causes. Y bueno, veo que hablas español, así que lo digo en español, que es mi idioma más cómodo. Y pues lo mismo que cuando Lukács habla de la incompatibilidad entre sistemas parciales, y eso viene inspirado por la lectura neocantiana de la forma de objetividad, hay una, pues justo habla de esta incapacidad o de este ruido social. Y más bien recibo tu exposición desde esta lectura, que es lo que estoy trabajando. Y bueno, muchas gracias.
No, muchas gracias. Thank you. Yeah, that is in the book is quite prominent, or yeah, like I deal more with the concept of reification. The thing is, the problem with reification is that it might be too brute, well, too wide, and this has to do with actually with following kind of critique or question that I got from Jean-Pierre Caron, which maybe he has also been at Foreign Object. Basically, that whether social dissonance is only a form of demystification or enlightening, the false consciousness. And early Lukács certainly can be considered that reification that basically the proletariat, through gaining self-consciousness, will be able to liberate itself from false consciousness. That's the kind of main critique. Gillian Rose has a very good critique on early Lukács' notion of reification, and argues that Adorno is much more precise when talks about non-identity thinking. And still, early Lukács contains some romantic kind of anti-technological influences from Weber, and yeah, which can lead to some, it's closer to some form of essentialisms that I try not to fall into. I mean, but it's extremely important. And last week I talked about, I started with a quote by Lukács, which is the way that we naturalize, the inversion between subject and object that occurs in capitalism, that, that we humans become the objects in the objectification process of capital through commodification by selling our labor power. And then we are dominated by what are actually objects, so social relations that are crystallized in money, for example, and they become the subject that move us, that that take us. And in this process and our perception, we lose totally the ability to understand how this occurs, because through bourgeois ideology, we tend to naturalize both work and money. So we cannot basically understand the function of real abstractions that conditions us. And this is close to the notion of transparency that actually also Metzinger talks about, and I talked last week about it, which is the inability to see how we are determined. So for Metzinger is how we are determined by the self model. We don't have access to the vehicle that produces this self model. So this transparency is what he calls an special form of darkness that we are trapped in. And reification can be this this form of the functioning of some form of darkness in which we basically make processes, social processes, into things or concepts that then we take them as natural. So yeah, the question of reification is, I mean, they are extremely helpful, but maybe reification is too much of a, how do you say, broad brush, like a big brush that is not precise enough to allow you to look how these processes occur. But they're extremely, but this is very important. It has been extremely important, and certainly our conception of the subject as the individual subject it goes through it goes through process of reification, and then please go ahead.
Yeah, my point was on the incompatibility between partial systems, which comes from his neo-Kantian influences. The recent readings emphasize the neo-Kantian formation of Lukács right before the reification essay, and that incompatibility between partial systems that are rationalized in Weber systems is which I think is more compatible with social dissonance. That was my point. Not so much the concept of reification as such, but the Kantian treatment of incompatibility of partial systems.
Okay, yeah, I'm not so familiar with this. With this neo-Kantian strata of knowledge, but yeah, thank you. And I'll have to look into it.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Does somebody have any more questions, please? Or comments, or anything that comes to your mind? I'll be really appreciated, greatly appreciated.
I don't know if I can articulate this very well, but I've seen you're a musician as well. You work with improvisation, which is my field too, as a musician. And I wanted to ask you about how you feel these two things can connect or not, improvisation with this agency in social dissonance or not, or I don't know if you have thought about this question about the improvisation on a social level.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, that's great, because I guess maybe I focus too much on this theoretical side, but I think the model that this idea of predictive processing, which argues that we have a model that produces already a set of expectations of what is to happen and how we conceive ourselves. I think improvisation is a great tool to undermine that model, or to to accelerate that recalibrating of the model, and that's why I use, there is a lot of improvisation within the interpretation of this social dissonance score, precisely because is the noise is what makes the model that we have to be confronted with something that is either unexpected or that we don't have the so it's like challenging the inner model that we have. So, and that's maybe it's the smallest or most minimal kind of process that can occur for a kind of recalibration of the model. And the interesting thing is that it's a performative action that really allows, like, okay, if this is possible, then the expectations that you produce with your model, then they will be opening up. And then this connects maybe to the other question that I got, whether this conception of noise was elitist, or that it could be, that this noise could be a kind of, disenfranchising, like it can render powerless people. But I think it's the opposite. Is maybe because it's the most minimal gesture that something can happen that you didn't expect it, is something that can be extrapolated. I obviously have not, I didn't find the means to expand it, and I still, what I do it often is in the aesthetic or musical realm. But this is something that I will actually try to try out in a different context, and in a bit more, something that actually will bridge either politics, mental health, aesthetics, and this actually came when I was talking before with Claire. That will be my, that will be really the next step. It will make sense to do that. And actually, Jean-Pierre Caron had this interesting comparison. In Brazil, they've been having this project, a political project, which is called the Circle of Studies of Idea and Ideology. And it's been going for 10 years. And basically, they meet up, and there's nothing, the only thing that is, they meet either online or, present. And the only thing, as far as I remember, is that everybody has to give some feedback at the end, like not during, but at the end of the session. And then somebody has to collect all this and formulate a feedback, taking into account all these feedbacks. And so it's like there's a very minimal formal procedure, but within this, everything can happen, and it's very open. And he was critical of the process insofar as this minimal form gave it an aesthetic, as it was at the end it became some kind of form of aesthetics. And then was saying that actually social dissonance is almost the other way, in the sense that it comes from aesthetics. It was presented in it is presented in aesthetic realm, but because it's understandability, its potential for improvisation without any formal restraints somehow could really permeate into politics. And I would love this to happen, but I still need to try it out, So if anybody's actually willing to try out, just let me know. And it needs, I need a bit of courage, Yeah, but
Thank you.
Yeah, I think improvisation is extremely productive precisely because the reception and the production happens simultaneously. So it accepts perceptions and challenges the set of expectations for our models. So that's for me still extremely powerful. But the whole project starts from a problem of an assumption of the freedom of the individual in improvisation. So that's what I started to interrogate. And then it became an exploration of the unfreedom of the individual and how this idea of the individual comes about. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I was just thinking now that you were talking about mental health and these other things. I don't know, improvisation for me is also like a kind of a radical care strategy. I don't know. When you're in an improvisation session with some other people, you need to negotiate all the time, but it's like you need to also actually listen to each other, and it's in the listening more than the actual noise or sounds that you make that true improvisation happens, right? It's like in this going and coming conversation, and for me, this listening is a practice of care. As improvisation is a practice as well. It's not like a theory or a technique, but it's more like a practice, and you try different things out, and it depends and it changes radically depending on the people who's playing and the space and the public and all that. So this question about care, I think it's quite interesting also when talking about improvisation and how that can help in subverting some of these structures that we are thinking about. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's I mean that's really interesting. I don't know if I talked about this last week or not, but that basically it has changed for me quite a bit. Also, you know, like, so the score was written in 2017, and many things has happened before. So I think I mentioned last week, because actually now probably I need to do some form of trigger warning. I learned from the last iterations of the workshop. But it's not that it would, you know, trigger some previous traumatic thing. I don't think it usually does, but it's because it you know, it goes into strange places, you know, and can be, you know, maybe sometimes conflictive, you know, that you don't know. And I understand that in today's society, people just don't have the, you know, maybe this is, you know, this might be a bit of a challenge, you know, and so we'll need to maybe just introduce differently that, you know, that, okay, this, it might be challenging or uncomfortable or embarrassing, but, you know, that there is but it doesn't usually go, well, you know, it can go into a bit uncomfortable situations, but I think that ultimately are productive. But I think from today's conditions, certainly needs to be addressed, because, and then maybe it actually connects to the previous question, because a level of trust is needed to be built. And yeah, and I think in today's society, this trust is certainly hard to find, you know. And however, still I wouldn't, you know, certainly wouldn't associate it so far with, you know, a kind of notion. I mean, yeah, I wouldn't say is a, you know, I mean, or I'll have to be very careful of, you know, like whether it's a practice of care, because you know, I mean, it's just dealing with the noise of, you know, dealing with frustrations. It can be, but it's not that it already offers a kind of solution, you know, that, but you know, maybe it can be done in a caring way. And sometimes there is a lot of attentive, you know, sometimes people are very caring, but sometimes you get an asshole, you know, or sometimes not, you know, it's like really, and it doesn't try to cover up, you know, it's like, then we have to deal with this, you know, then the idea is to deactivate the asshole attitudes and not single out and personification, oh, you know, but like kind of trying to understand how structurally we reproduce these assholey attitudes, maybe out of insecurities, you know, but you know, if there is enough of a trusting situation and listening, this can be done collectively, and this is the most powerful, you know, iterations of social dissonance, where this realization happens. But it's not that, you know, the keys are there and like kind of like, oh, this happens like this. It's a much more like difficult, you know, like improvising, you know. It's not that you, sometimes it works, you feel good, but sometimes you feel bad about some improvisations, but actually those improvisations that you feel very bad, then you have to think, and then you have to like, actually that, why do I feel so bad about this? And then you work it through, and it also comes from that realization. I hated when improvisers felt good about themselves after a concert. I felt like, oh, this is, you know, this is not improvisation, you know, this is just narcissism. So yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Martin, you have the hand. I think you are muted.
How is that?
Yeah, now it's good. Now I can hear you.
Okay, I would like to return to the relationship between improvisation and predictive processing again.
Mhm.
I'm still not clear, especially given the last remark you just made about improvisation as a form of self-indulgence. My sense of predictive processing is that it is a reactive, passive form of processing cognitively for the purposes of adaptation.
Mhm.
And it's considered neo-Kantian, and with respect to current 4E's theorizing about cognition as a top-down phenomena. Now, you may know I've been really interested in improvisation in the context of jazz,
Mhm.
and particularly interested in accounting for and modeling what goes on during improvisation at the level of neuroscience and what those philosophical implications are. And it seems to me that I'm concluding that while one could associate the account of predictive processing with respect to the practice room, what goes on the bandstand is requires a relinquishing of control. And an allowance for interaction between anticipation and reaction that is clearly bottom up.
Mm.
And so I'm wondering how you reconcile, and there's also some really interesting side issues with respect to the multiplicity that emerges in terms of modeling what goes on cognitively, that there are multiple cognitive processes going on at the same time. And when there's less success with improvisation, a good part of that has to do with noise that occurs between different cognitive processes going on simultaneously, some top down, some bottom up. And so I would be interested in and the analogy, obviously I can't make any further claim, but the analogy I make it is like noise in the channel, that because there are multiple cognitive processes existing simultaneously, and they sometimes work at cross purposes with each other, such as the phenomenon of getting lost that happens pervasively among all improvisers to a greater or lesser extent. That the analogy I use is noise, and the noise happens when there's tension between the relinquishing of control and the need to assert intentionality at that moment, and that the very highest forms of improvisation require a surrender of intentionality, which would indicate something goes on that is active and yet doesn't fit into the predictive processing model.
I will agree. I will agree that that will be like, yeah, I will also consider that successful improvisation. But that's precisely, then noise has a positive side to it, rather. I mean, it's disturbing the model, or
yeah. Well, I mean, my dissertation director in the mid-'80s wrote a book called The Noise of Culture, in which he basically applies the principles of self-organization, and refers to not just Norbert Wiener, who was really influenced by Bergson, but also Prigogine, who I am a big fan of, in order to account for self-organization from noise. In other words, how does order emerge spontaneously out of chaos? So, it would be really interesting to see, given your own artistic practices, how the kind of improvisation that I'm interested in fits into the model that you're presenting. And you know, this is not anything that you have to answer right away. It's something that I would like to continue and carry on a conversation about, you know, in the future, because I think there are really interesting issues here that I would like to talk with you about. So I'm just, in other words, I'm not insisting on an answer.
No. Oh, no. This is this really touches closer to, you know, like, yeah, I'm part of this noise research union, which is like with Cecil Malaspina, Inigo Wilkin, Miguel Prado, and Martina Raponi and Sonia de Jager. We are investigating noise from different perspectives. So this is really, and Inigo Wilkins, I guess you, or maybe you followed him also, like in the last workshop that he did. I mean, he's also exploring noise and predictive processing. Extremely interesting.
What was the name that you said?
Inigo Wilkins.
Oh yeah. And I was asking, I guess, a similar line of questions with him, in this, in this venue. So,
I mean, I took the the whole predictive processing is like like kind of, it took me like, what is this thing about? And suddenly when it clicked, I found it extremely powerful because of its dynamic, the dynamism, and because actually in improvisation you can really experience it, that the way that we already have certain set of expectations. I mean, I kind of I left behind the instrument, and then I started to improvise with myself, with the audience, and then the material was no longer the production of sounds, but dealing with expectations and projections, so it's like things that they're actually, are they material, are they not material, but certainly have to do with the models that we have in regards to, the models that we produce in a given situation.
And the issue of intentionality comes into play here.
Yeah, exactly. And then how do you, like intentionally fact with other people's expectations, so then people, like there's no consensus about what's going on, and then within this confusion, I think is when social dissonance starts to breathe, because you're not just reasserting yourself as a individual subject, rather you have to collectively make sense of what's going on. And this question of bottom up and top down is extremely interesting. I don't know if it will be too crude, but this also has to do with intentionality, whether intentionality with this mental act, which is what Metzinger is arguing, which will be the most minimal, act of agency, whether that's like the, top down kind of, kind of signal that occurs, but then, when you're receiving it, with the bottom up, that will be the noise will have to come, it's part of the signal that you are, receiving, but however, you're also producing it through your own, understanding, through your own model. So it's I would love to talk about this and try to understand in a more precise way, and maybe some critiques of predictive model, because I've seen that like everybody has been using it for so many different, there's people who dealt with cognitive dissonance and predictive processing, ideology and predictive processing. So far, not about improvisation and predictive processing. So I'm extremely interested in kind of looking into it, but I find it very interesting, because I think in practice I have experienced it, that it seems, something that it makes very much sense.
Yeah, well, I hope if these issues come up that you'll keep me in the loop, because I would love to continue the
I would love to be in
conversation.
contact with you. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Shaum?
Hi, thank you. Well, this is all a bit over my head, but I find it fascinating, and I have a question. I can't say that I'm not intrigued by the whole concept of voice transmission, how we, I don't know, for some reason the words you're using, you don't use desire. For me, I think of the term desire as having a very similar value or a very similar activity as what you were referring to as improvisation. Right? Sort of, for me, it begins with desire. And this conversation seems to me to be reflecting on transmission, right? How we transmit acoustics or ideas and complicated spaces, and therefore that you're building on the value of noise maybe and its role for enunciation or desire or improvisation. But it's maybe I'm not sure that I'm very well reading into Martin's previous discussions, but there's an affinity there for me. What I'm wondering is more about the reception side of things, right? And so when, let's say, on some level, I'm not sure this is not terribly different. I'm an economist, right? I'm not a philosopher. All of these discussions are brand new to me, but the notion that Brasier speaks, very critically of the Deleuzian idea of schizophrenia, the notion that these individualistic improvisations, okay, they extend into spaces. I will say public spaces. But I want to turn it around and ask some questions about reception. How do we, how do we find receivers? How do people who improvise find their enunciations, their acoustic emissions received, right? And it seems to be a tremendously more complicated problem than the idea of how we enunciate, whether schizophrenically or with improvisation, how we send out a signal. And what I want to ask you is how, on the other hand, in the terms of reception, now, and I'm going to borrow, very, very, very specific notion of what I've, my understanding of Prigogine, since Martin mentioned him, is, in these spaces sort of, so when you send out, when there's a signal out there being transmitted, what conducts or what frames or what shapes how it's received. And for me, and my very limited vocabulary and understanding conceptual abilities and these conversations, I've always wondered how transmissions are blocked by familiarity, by false familiarity. Transmissions, schizophrenic, improvised transmissions are sent out into spaces, and they're always sort of reduced to whatever the state space would have to say about how they are valued. And what I'm interested in is, how might I, for example, receive whatever you're saying based on my own understanding of state space, my own understanding of what is going on in the environment, and not really attuned into your improvisation, the complexity that's coming from the desire of your behind your enunciation. But I'm just sort of blocked. My reading of my reception of those emissions is blocked by, and in short, by a kind of morality, by a kind of state space, by a kind of what I understand as correct. And for me, this this is kind of, Lukács, Marx, these all are saying that my ability to receive those things on the complexity of which they're emitted is blocked because I am, I'm reified, because I'm tied into a whole network of valuations that make it really impossible for me to access the valuation system upon which you're emitting and transmitting. So I guess just to summarize and cut short, if you want to make a speech, and I'm sorry to extend so long, but okay, so I appreciate the whole transmission side of this conversation. I think it's extremely important. And I'm just wondering how we start to think about the reception side, because if that little sort of, if that little story that Reza Negarestani likes to tell about, the nest of insects that is tricked by another insect about, what is, what is, what are the hormones that they need to attack, or what are the signals that are friendly and what are enemy, and this sort of, I could be totally incapable of in any way receiving some foreign object, if you will, based on anything other than the straightforward tools that I've received from my state education, from my state understanding of morality, from my state understanding of right and wrong. And so if you turn it around, you're problematic. How do we address the other side? And I'll leave it at that. And thank you.
No, thank you. Really appreciated the question, and I think it's an important one, and maybe it connects to the two other questions that I wanted. That the critique that I got. Which one was: is social dissonance only a form of demystification, enlightening false consciousness, or is is this social dissonance project elitist? And I think in regards to the reception. Sorry, the transmission, or how it gets transmitted, and I think that's the important part of, for me, the social dissonance project, which is the score. Is the score is where these ideas get, realized in practice, and things become very concrete, and they don't need, you don't need to know about Lukács or like then things can be it kind of, because there is no in this score. I mean, usually there are interpreters, but the score is open to everybody, so everybody can play each other, and the idea is that we play each other as instruments, and there kind of produces equalizes everybody to a certain extent. Obviously, there is always people have different knowledges and come from different backgrounds, but at least it's enough to put things forward, to try things out. And there, there is the idea is to suspend values of judgment, however temporarily, at least to be able to play around, so there is no these hierarchies of knowledge or class, or that they're always there, they're always there, but at least they can become material to be played upon. And so this comes from trying to play with the division between audience and performer, and not accepting that premise that is usually that we come from. It's obviously it's been done to death, but it allows for people to be part of something that usually maybe would have experience just as an audience. And here the question of what's activity, what's not activity, what's transmission, and what is reception, that becomes problematized or played with. It's not that clear. It's not that clear. What it decenters. What it attempts to do is to decenter the situation, so and play with the foreground and background. So that is like a kind of constant playing around, and by that, who is the transmitter and who is not, and who is the reception, that hopefully there is a much more dynamic relationship to that. And the question of desire, it's interesting because it doesn't come in the book so much. Maybe just a bit maybe in regards to psychoanalysis, but in the score, it's certainly the score is there. I mean, it's just like, but it's how to explain it. It's kind of, it's like trying to improvise with people's desires or lack of desires. So I mean, the idea with this score is that everything can become part of the improvisation, and by being improvisation is desires, frustrations, projections, expectations, boredom, embarrassment, all this becomes the material to be improvised with. And yeah, and the attempt is to have a much more dynamic relationship between perception, transmission. Yeah, but maybe maybe I don't know, maybe you make me think that there actually should try to think more. And this is something that I have to do. I mean, there is like 180 hours of documentation online in YouTube. And, something that I want to do with the rest of my life at some point is to engage with this material and try to understand what is it that happened. And I would like to have people that come from different fields, like to have a kind of research group. I think it's a very yeah.
I just add one thing maybe, just to ask and expand the conversation. So on one level, I'm wondering what prevents this framing from breaking down into a very sort of, neoliberal / Deleuzian schizophrenic. Everybody has a way of sending out signals, and therefore it's almost as if we can only resort to some Bayesian way of organizing, or a Bayesian way of countering our blindness to go forward. But in that sense, for me, that kind of how to go forward with so many improvised signals, it still remains stuck in the cave for me. It still remains, if you will, not asking the question of how, despite all of these improvisations, we all share a conceptuality that we can't get beyond. Maybe I'm reaching too far. I don't know.
I appreciate that very much, because it's funny that the book really tries to it tries to challenge neoliberal ideology and certainly it's not Deleuzian in that sense, and maybe the description that I just gave of the score might have point towards that direction, but hopefully the realization when, while doing it, nobody came to me, saying, oh, that was a very neoliberal experience, or that was a very Deleuzian experience. Somehow, nobody has come to me, maybe they did and never told me, but somehow I never got that feeling or that, kind of sense. Whether, the attempt is to, even if it's a very big objective, is to try, is a space for allowing the social dissonance to resonate, which is the noises that occur between the model that we have of ourselves and the reality that we are, facing, which inevitably is, the tension comes from the class struggle that occurs, in capitalist exploitation. So, even though class struggle maybe is not, the discussions, they come sometimes, but not maybe very often, but there is a kind of underlying, like kind of underlying questioning that why this tension exists, and so then, it's, there is a kind of realization of negativity or a negative kind of sense, or these ideas of kind of feelings of embarrassment. It's like it's certainly not about empowerment. It can, and empowerment can only occur through the thinking processes collectively, but they come through practice because we're engaging, like doing things in a space that actually this collective noise that is being produced, is trying to, okay, where does this come from, and why, why is it that I'm feeling, embarrassed, So there is not, only at the happening on the cognitive level, which this is a kind of form of answer to Jean-Pierre Caron's, is this only about, the mystification? Is it only about, producing consciousness? No, it's, how bodies in a room feel in a certain way, given that there is a kind of form of estrangement that you don't have the tools to basically say, oh, okay, it's this, and that's it. Like you have to like, why is this happening? Like you have to engage with it. So, and maybe these feelings, that's when the reception and transmission gets a bit, it's not so clear cut. You need to deal with this. Why this feeling of embarrassment comes from, and like then you might be reception, you might, like kind of an audience of your own sensations.
I am done, and I want to not say any more because there's other people who want to talk, but I just want to just be careful of one thing that I may have said that might be misinterpreted, but I'm not sure. I just want to be clear that so despite all ability to play with noise, to play with what's out there, even though we might find ourselves extremely agile and embracing sort of how to play with objects, regardless of what we do, how is it not some kind of onanism if it's always received by state valuations? And that's my concern. That's really my concern as an economist, that we always, no matter how you find people on the periphery trying to make sounds, but they're always interpreted by the center in a certain way that reduces them.
What do you mean by the center? What is your understanding?
So center, I mean, to force the contrast. Let me just say that, let's say that we have only two ways of communicating with each other. We have your desire, my desire, and we have state valuations. You and I are both, it's kind of a triangulation going on. You and I are both completely directed by state valuations, but we have desire that might escape those valuations. We have an ability to speak to each other's desires external or exterior to state valuations. But that seems to be almost an impossibility for me, because the fact that you and I might be speaking to each other and we both have desires, it would be very rare occasion for either one of us to begin interpreting the other or independent of state valuations. And that's sort of, for me, sort of, I don't know, that's a kind of framing that would seem to me the minimal requirement to exit the cave, right? That we would have to be able to converse with each other and find alternative valuation systems in each other's desires. And I'm not using Deleuzian notions of desire. I'm not familiar with him enough to say that I am or I am not even. All I'm trying to say is that it seems to me that we have so been enveloped in all of our understanding of things that it would almost be an impossible task to interpret each other independent of state valuations. But for me, that seems to be the minimal requirement to get out of the cave. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, but I will not agree, I would not
Good.
agree in the sense that we have, I mean, the state evaluations, it's not, I wouldn't say, I mean, I certainly think that the concept of ideology problematizes, this triangulation, as you call it, between the, desire and state evaluations. I think it's a much more intricate, complex, and I will not give any liberatory intrinsic value to desire, especially in this, that, as I, it's for me, this social dissonance.
You're calling it improvisation. Maybe what I'm trying to use desire in a way that reflects what you're calling improvisation, and I'm not trying. That's why I'm really afraid of how I use the words, because I don't know if it could go sour. But what I think I'm doing when I'm saying the word desire, I think I'm somehow expressing an affinity with how you have called improvisation something that is liberating. And for me, that improvisation has something behind it, which I call desire. I don't know if that's, but if you disagree, I'd be more than happy. I would be delighted, because I want to understand more.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe what I should have said, from the beginning is, I see social dissonance as an exploration of unfreedom. So the improvisation is not liberation, but rather like allowing, the impossibility of freedom. Why is freedom not possible under, the given conditions? So, and that's why, this impossibility of unfreedom produces a frustration. And this is where when social dissonance resonates. So it's not a manual, it's not that from social dissonance a manual can be, produced to take us into liberation. It's, it's like, given the conditions that we're in, what social dissonance tries to understand is, is trying to decipher, the liberal understanding of freedom, which is based on, which is actually on freedom, and how we embodied it, in our self-conception. So, it's not prefigurative, it's prefigurative of trying to understand the symptoms and effects of, our own self-conception and self-reproduction in the given conditions. It's just like allowing the shitty frustrations and noisy misunderstandings and false projections that occurs between, our self-model or the internal model that we have and the reality that we have to face. So yeah, so that's the kind of that, and the state, I wouldn't say is the state has a function within the whole ideological structure, but the way that our own self-reproduction occurs, it's a much more complex, complex process that still is up for grabs, to understand, what are the best tools that we have to understand the way that forms of thought are determined by social forms. That's that I numbered a name of these, certain terms that have been used, because this is the crucial. It's like, okay, to what extent, what is our room to maneuver? And this is, the answers that we get so far, they seem to be extremely either limiting or problematic, but other more affirmative understandings, they seem to be even more ideologically tainted. So I think it's a hard work that is necessary, I think. Yeah. I think Tam had a question. Thank you so much, Son. Tam.
Yeah, sorry. was a while ago, so I'm trying to think. It's a little bit of a, it's a little bit away from what you were just discussing, but I guess what I mean, I know you've said that it's complex, of course, the question of social dissonance. I totally appreciate that. So it's probably one of both, you know. But I wonder if you saw it as a political project in a sense, or as a kind of I guess it's a philosophical project as well. Well, I'm, you know, sorry, I'm not putting words in your mouth. I assume that of course you can correct me if I'm wrong, but and then from making those assumptions, I was thinking something that jumped out at me from the Metzinger text, something that that I struggle with, but not because I necessarily disagree with what Metzinger's saying. It's because you know, I fear that he's correct, but you know, within my own kind of thinking and work in other areas of my life, when he's speaking about the concept of goals, this kind of naive concept of goals, and he's talking about kind of naive neuroscientists and this idea of goals, and he takes obviously a more a cold kind of naturalist vein, philosophically speaking, where this concept of goals is in fact totally kind of normative in that sense. So I think he as he would describe it, that there are essentially no goals, you know, that nothing has any intrinsic value in a sense, and everything in that line of thinking is sort of tarried to an organism in some way, and that from that I guess perhaps this is maybe this is the kind of part of his work that you're drawn to. I don't know. Maybe this is the part of the work that Ray's, some of this aspects of Ray's works, maybe why he's drawn to Metzinger as well, trying to get out of this, trying to find a way out of this inevitable kind of situation that of nothing having this intrinsic value. And therefore, I guess to come back to my first question would be that if you do take that position, and I tend to, you know, think in those terms, you know, as sort of cold as that is, but you know, we have to you know, face up to some of these facts and then move forward accordingly. Therefore, you know, in terms of like objectives, let's say, what is how do you look at kind of this project, which is what it is, you know, of social dissonance as a kind of as a project, if you know, if you can't look at it in a kind of goal-driven sense, or in any kind of objective, or how would you kind of think of that? Yeah, that was what I was, you know, I was just wondering how you would think about some of those comments by Metzinger in relation to this work.
Well, I mean, thank you so much. I really appreciate that question. For me, it was liberating because it was like, okay, Saturn, you know, because there was so many discussions around alienation, you know, and kind of attacking early Marx because, you know, having, you know, that we are alienated from something, you know, from Gattungswesen, from our species being, you know, there is something that capitalism takes away from us, you know, it's like, and for me, you know, Metzinger is just like, well, look, if you think that there is something intrinsic to us, look, you know, here there's nothing. But I also, you know, coming back to, you know, where I come from, you know, in improvisation, when I was like, yeah, starting, there was a very strong phenomenological approach to improvisation, you know, which presupposes that we are owners of our own experience, you know, that we have a first person perspective. So then Metzinger, through Ray and Metzinger, is just like, okay, here are, you know, philosophical and naturalist, you know, kind of accounts that totally undermine that. But that doesn't mean that there is no value. It means that there is no self, you know, which is great, because then it means, okay, it needs to be constructed. Great, you know. And yeah, in regards to that ghostly or, you know, phantom subjectivity, which, you know, For me was, okay, really interesting, you know, like it was actually Cecil Malaspina that suddenly connected the spectral objectivity that Lukács reification kind of points towards, and then the, you know, phantom subjectivity then really kind of connect. I already had that kind of, you know, these two forms of alienation, but then it was such a, okay, you know, this is where reification comes and, you know, gets hold of, you know, of existing, of our understanding of commodities and ourselves in commodity production, and then, you know, how these neurocomputational mechanisms actually produce this phantom illusion of selfhood. And then it's just like, okay, so Metzinger gave us this great account of the self-model theory of subjectivity, but actually it doesn't give any account of the ideology of liberal subject, you know, which is what this happened, you know. So then it's like, oh, there's a lot of work to be done, you know, there's really, really a lot of work. And now it's like, I don't talk so much, you know, I bring verification, but not ideology in the book. But then, you know, I guess I will need to deal with these other different terms of how things connect to each other. And this was my first rudimentary approach, which still can go very far, which is very weird that I answer, you know, the Lacanian subject to, you know, with Metzinger, which might be actually quite problematic, and like bringing a kind of Kantian, you know, yeah, post-Kantian, as somebody has described it, approach, which is maybe not very productive, but it's dynamism. It's kind of, it's this socially and culturally produced. This, you know, seems that it also is, it can be altered, it can be changed, and that's where the potential comes, which actually for, you know, it seems that the Lacanian subject is already, it has some kind of already a framework in which, you know, there's certain limitations to it, for good and for bad. You know, and it's obviously I did a caricature in where I speak, and I hope to get deeper into it. But, you know, like, I mean, following the deciphering concept of Sylvia Wynter is like, actually, you know, this also conception, psychoanalytic conception of the subject might be part of this problem, you know, and this I haven't brought it, you know, it's like, you know, I haven't brought it into, you know, as a cage, you know, or a cave, as somebody will put it, you know, but is it, you know, is it kind of, rather than liberatory, it is actually part of the problem that, you know, it actually is, it gives us an understanding of the subject that is actually not equipped, or is not a kind of revolutionary enough for us to change things. This is a question that I need to deal with. And regarding the spectrality, and once again, you know, I was, and phantomaticity, something that I wanted to talk about, it was a bit too much. It's like, okay, out of this sense of, you know, this enclosed sense, claustrophobic sense that there is nothing that we can do, this capitalist realist sense, you know, it's like, I see that there is, especially in regards to, you know, artistic production, like two ways are, you know, out, and one is maybe closer, you know, it looks at the past, and I'm thinking of kind of ontology, and, you know, ways in which, you know, the past is kind of trying to find hidden potentials in the past, or like, you know, like undermining certain ontologies about the past, but actually, you know, like seeing if the past can give us an answer, you know, for the present. And then there is forms of, you know, looking at the future, and I'm thinking of, you know, like the whole speculative fiction, or, you know, theory fiction, or, you know, people who have interested in divination. You know, there's like these practices that try to, you know, I mean, wall building, you know, there is like trying to construct that, you know, from these conditions we can already construct, either aesthetically, theoretically, already a future. And I think both of them seem to be more symptomatic, you know, of these forms of spectrality that we are living through, rather than actually answers that can, you know. But maybe this is a very, you know, a very vast and generalizing statement, you know. but somehow it's what it makes me, you know, I see this as a kind of reactions rather than proposals. But obviously, if we look at it closely at different projects and different, you know, I'm sure there will be very interesting, you know, aspects that we can take away from it. But at the moment, I'm kind of looking at them as kind of ways of replying to this sense of enclosedness. Yeah. Somebody else has some question?
Maybe I meant the question I posted on the chat. Can you hear me well?
Okay.
Can you hear me? I'm not sure if my voice
Yeah,
comes through.
please go ahead. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. So in your book, you polemize the myth of the given and advocate for demystifications and decipherings that reveal the conditions of our alienation. However, is this another form of mystification, namely a subscription to the myth of alterity, which is the ancient myth of Prometheus? Is capitalism feeding itself from that myth alongside the myth of Zeus?
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, yeah, that's a good question, but I mean, but okay, can you please talk more about the myth of alterity and what it actually?
Yeah. Yes, I mean this idea that we can self-determine our future and we can change our future. I mean, this is the myth of Prometheus, right? And I call it the myth of alterity to draw a comparison with the myth of the givens that you mentioning in the book.
Yeah, that's an interesting. I guess I try to be. I mean, I kind of criticize the left accelerationist in the book. It's they were pretty much more Promethean than but I'm also very close to race. I mean, but I guess that for example, Ray has a great paper and talk on Prometheanism, but that's when he was much more, maybe it's Wilfrid Sellars Kantian. He had a much stronger belief on the power of reason. And then, maybe this project is, like kind of encountering all the questions that we are talking about. It's like, okay, to what extent is the forms of thought determined by our social forms? And that's, I think it's not producing. I don't think it's giving us it's not prefigurative in this sense. It's not not giving you already tools. Maybe what it tries to understand is, why don't we have the tools to construct a future together? So it's a kind of it's a study on unfreedom, a practical study on unfreedom, of our unfreedom, why this happens. So it's not already assuming that we can construct a future, like, in fact, it tries to understand why this is not possible. And still at this stage, it's I don't know, maybe I mean, it will be amazing if actually this project takes a more political form. There, maybe this can start to get answered in practice in a much more, it can advance in this answering this question, and probably that's the logical way forward, perhaps, but it's not, but okay, but I still have to think a bit more, even though I think, it's trying through the interpretation of the score, and maybe this is something that I should have done as part of this workshop. So in order to have a better sense of what this project is about. So yeah, I guess, I mean, always when I do books presentations, I interpret the score, but somehow here, because I'm still in the process of deciphering, this term of deciphering is kind of new, or it's like something that I'm trying to work through, but the deciphering has to be a practice, so it's not, so there maybe I should have what time is it? Maybe it's not too late. Maybe we can interpret the score or not, depending how you feel.
Does it work online, or it has to be in person?
I mean, I've done it online before.
We have at least 1 more hour or more. You mean the time?
Yeah, is somebody who doesn't want to do it? But maybe what I will ask you to do is to either change the settings in Zoom, so the algorithm doesn't suppress your sound and you put your sound on, and which actually advances. I lost track of where the audio settings were. I mean, what it would be great is if we, open up the microphones, and the more people that have their camera, the better. Oh yeah, here it is. Can you see the score?
Yeah.
Okay, so there is a bit of a problem, which is that I will be able to see only very few of you. So anyway. So would you like to follow me and do what I do? Just like as a starting point kind of thing, to just into the space and relax, move your body in ways that they feel good to you. Liberate yourself from yourself. Try to expand into the waves of the internet. Be free. Explore the room that you're in. Explore the microphone.
Hello.
Say what you want. I'm most welcome to shout if you want to. You are welcome to behave in ways that they are not expected at this moment. You are welcome to discuss the model of yourself and others. You are You're welcome to describe your fears to everybody.
I'm afraid of war.
I'm afraid of peace.
Tenemos una identidad definida. Hay una identidad profunda, lingüística, telúrica, si quieres, una comunidad de sentimientos y de ideales, pero no hemos alcanzado.
You're welcome to give instructions to others.
Can anyone talk in their native languages?
Escucha delicadamente. El público es tu instrumento. Tócalo.
Αν με φασαρεί, αλλά δεν πειράζει, έχει μεγάλη φάση.
La práctica, como estamos normalmente instrumentalizados.
Has. Up. Yep. Look. Look.
Maybe we can all together sing the score. 1, 2, 3. Listen.
Oh no. Oh no. No, no, no. No. No, no. No, no. No, no. No, no. Doggy, 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 doggy. Hello. Hello. Oh.
Thanks, I don't see you. Afternoon, good evening, and good night.
Yeah. Hello. Let's make a rock.
How will you describe the atmosphere?
alien.
Alien good, alien bad.
Alien noise.
Good sensations. Good feelings. A fantastic meeting with joy and happiness and pain too. And a smile in the face. And the body shaking. The organization of the thoughts. I ask myself, but I don't find myself. Other code. The organization and the creation. Oh, amazing. And my body asks you to more. And I can't see the faces and my face. Yeah.
Can you fulfill your desires?
So hang on, if you want to but if you need it, it's how another door, and so that's what you help. I've got no time. I've got no time. I've got no time.
Doors are open. I can't see your face.
No time for time.
I can't see your face in my face. No. Wow. Good.
Fluid dynamics, mixing performance, and numerical data, clicker, cleaver, viewer, modulation, machines. Mixer, mixer, computational fluid dynamics, mixing performance, and numerical data.
Concepts, questions, and movements as a way to explore the dissonance that exists between the individual narcissism that capitalism promotes and our social capacity, between how we conceive ourselves as free individuals with agency and the way that we are socially determined by capitalist relations, technology, and ideas.
What are we right now? Are we users?
Dynamics, mixing performance, and numerical data, clicker, cleaver, viewer.
What are we using?
Or machine.
Is this the only thing we are doing? We are using? Or we are being used?
Time. Got no time.
Are delivered the very next day in amazingly low prices. Will you go for fast delivery?
Usually the last 10 minutes, we use it to do honest reflections about what has happened or what is happening.
It's probably some cable box. Yeah. Usually it's either HDMI cables, but there's a big bond. Yeah, that's why the network includes some of those topics of power and lots of other
Nothing is happening. This is ridiculous. There's no communication. There's no concept. There's nothing about which anyone could agree on or say, I saw an object and we shared the observation, we shared the sight. There's nothing. There's nothing. There's no extension. There's nothing. There's nothing. There's just noise. Just noise. So how do you fight it? I mean, or you don't? You think it's a tool? It's something
I
good.
can't speak. I can't speak. I can't speak anymore. I can't. I can't speak. I can't speak.
Obfuscation. It's just total obfuscation.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
if you ever
I can't
hoped for
speak. I
somebody
can't
making
speak. I
connection
can't
about
speak anymore. I
sharing
can't.
some observation on an object,
Yeah.
it's gone.
Yeah.
It's just gone.
And the
It's
sky,
just, that's exactly what that's.
sky. It's wonderful.
Η χαρά του παιδιού, which translates the joy of the child.
So there, we all echoed a bunch of stuff. We just echoed. What? We were all like, we were puppets echoing. We were just objects reflecting things.
We are electronic.
There's nothing more. There's nothing more.
We are electronic performers.
Unless I take someone else's experience and try to ask about it, which nobody's doing there. Nobody's doing there. Are we doing? What are we doing? Impatient? Is it impatience to ask the question? Is it insanity to try to voice something?
We are mutilated bodies put in small boxes on screens.
Nothing. I mean, that is the reality. That is actually the reality we're all trying to deal with, is that you've just created here.
It's so different to the reality in your room once we finish the score.
Was that a question directed at me? Was that a question directed at somebody in particular?
It's open. It's an open question. Are you performing, Shaum, or are you?
No, I'm not performing. I don't consider what I do performing. I consider some sort of looking for some sort of way of. Yeah.
I can walk on the sky. It is beautiful sky there. Thank you to share your sky. So beautiful sky. Hello.
Is there like there was an instruction? There was some comment.
There is no instruction.
There was an instruction that the last 10 minutes would try to say something.
Yeah.
I don't know, but nobody followed with the instruction. The instructor didn't follow the comment. Yeah, so
time.
The light of technology has a hole.
Because we are in this in between performing and not performing. I guess it's about the framing, and it's still people are in the performative mode, and is the performative mode a way of deal with the situation in a playful way that is less exposing? I don't know. Now I feel that I'm coming back to when you said, Shaum, that you were not performing, then I kind of, okay, let's stop also performing, even though I'm performing.
I feel lost. I feel scared. I feel lost. I feel like what I do when I'm scared and lost, I look frantically for something that is somewhat stable that I could share the observation with. This is like my life story. Yeah, there's nobody to share an observation with. Sometimes you feel like that. Did you ever feel like that? I don't know. finds it
We
extremely
elected Shaum.
disconcerting.
But you are.
I'm just a performer for you, so just prefer to close the screen because that's not what I want
Yeah,
to
this
do.
and the amazing screen, amazing sky, you are not alone. We are together, maybe.
So in regards to desire, Shaum, like, I mean, on transmission and reception, how do you feel about this?
There's a lot of transmission, but in terms of reception, it's sort of just confused, regurgitations. There's a, I don't know. It's like it's this noise is the exception, and this sort of framing. We're just praying that noise is the exception. But what if it's the inverse? Noise is the rule, and we have to find some way of doing something different. But we're not doing that here. Maybe we're trying to. Maybe we're bodying forth, intuitively hoping to arrive at some way of racing the noise momentarily to say something what's meaningful to you, what's meaningful to someone else. Otherwise, I mean, what feels important, urgent for you, as opposed to just pure noise, which has a mind of its, something alien to us.
Is for somebody liberating?
It's not liberating for me, it's imprisoning. But I want to hear someone else say the opposite. That would be interesting.
Possible to find a way?
For me, it's feeling like improvising, like when I improvise music and you have this freedom, you can try everything and fail in everything, and that's the goal.
I don't believe that. I don't believe I don't believe that's possible. I think it's an imaginary thing. I don't know.
Keep walking.
You're like a madman running down the street. The police should be chasing me. I'm running away from your noise, and I can't get away from it. I can't get away from it.
Wonderful walking.
Like who in this room that we've created for ourselves has something that they feel good about, something that they feel, not just a good feeling, but something there in the room that you feel good about, some object in this room we created that you feel draws something for you, and in terms of attention that deserves your attention.
I've forgotten about my stomach ache. I had a stomach ache all day.
There's a film scene in that film with what is that film? They're all the instructor. What is it? Robin Williams. He's in the film. He says we're all going to go out and dance in the courtyard, and then one guy says he's not going to dance. So he took the liberty to, participate in his own way. So it kind of, what we're doing here kind of reminds me of the scene in that film. What is it called?
He's not going to dance. So he took the liberty to participate in his own way. So
everybody had to walk.
What we're doing here kind of reminds me.
The funny walk. It was remember that scene called the funny walk?
So the liberty to
I don't know if anybody else here is.
So kind of what we're doing here kind of reminds me.
It's like the more you participate, the more you regret having participated.
Okay,
Is like
the interpretation of the score has been finished.
the only way.
So people who have not talked so far are most welcome to talk now. And if you want to share how you experience it, or you want to say something, or we can be here in silence also. It's, I think it's.
Yeah, I want to say thank you for this experience. It was so amazing. Thank you to Shaum to show the sky and to walk together and to make it sounds, and another organization was amazing. So thank you all. I feel better now. Thank you.
I got reminded of a workshop with Adam Zaretsky and others on transhumanism, and they asked us to behave like animals, and I got reminded of that. But here's noise focused.
Game, the Tampa Bay Rays. They're holding that. Yeah, because they've gone so deep in it.
I feel we should behave like that in our everyday lives more often, maybe once in a day, for a couple of minutes, maybe.
I need to learn about music improvisation. I really did very shitty sounds, which was kind of the purpose, but I know that people know how to improvise purposely.
To get all your home projects done well. Reese McGuire 1 for 2 with a double. He scored twice today. Hitting .298. He just keeps on hitting. Let's get a good advance. He's scrappy. It's not.
Forgot to turn the TV off. I've been at work this whole time too, so I've been switching in and out of some very different frames of mind and missing quite a bit of what's been going on.
We're all in the dark, right? I mean, we're all in the dark. And we're the only things that are here to a certain extent. Yeah, of course, that's not true, but I mean, to know what else is here, we kind of rely on each other. Kind of disconcerting. But it's the only form of hope at the same time.
Did in any way the interpretation of the score answer some of the previous questions, or by no means, or not at all?
Yes, I enjoy chaotic, noisy, like collective experiences. So I don't, for me, it's just fun in a way. So I don't know if I get to have a say, because I've like trained myself to understand that kind of level of detachment in that kind of context, where you're sort of like, it's like swimming or something, or rock climbing or something along those lines, where you do it and part of the process is also kind of keeping you alive in a sense. And it's significantly adrenalizing, I think, for certain personality types, but not for others. Like, I had a number of punk bands before and things like that, and people had to like leave the room and stuff because it made them so uncomfortable. But then, part of that is that 95% of the room is dancing and having a good time, right? So that's kind of I don't know, maybe someone with like a opposite feeling about that kind of thing could say.
In that space you described, there is something shared, which is the acoustic, that everyone is, whether you have headphones on or not, everybody somehow thinks that they have an access to an object that is common. In this space, it's somewhat questionable.
Has anybody read the Chemical Wedding? The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosencrantz? Is that Rosencrantz? Something like that. There's as the book progresses, it starts out, it's kind of like a race or a game or something like that to get into this special wedding along. And my favorite one is probably when everybody has to climb the rope ladder, and the only reason why the main character gets to the top of the rope ladder or whatever before it's broken by the like weight of the crowd trying to pull it down is because somebody helps him. It's a nice simple thing, but like because and the person was able to help him because he gave up, basically, because he was just kind of standing around, not trying to fight as much as other people who ended up collapsing the entire structure that was going to get them to the top.
It's like we're in the Marquis de Sade's room of horrors. We're waiting for the person to come out and tell us what the game is. He's sitting there very quiet. Object music.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it's difficult to do this in the Zoom setting, but it's interesting. I mean, every comment kind of determines how we perceive it, and yeah, I don't know. I don't know whether it was well. I mean, I don't know. In my experience, it's always worth trying, but it seems. Yeah, the energy seems kind of very different from when we started. And then I guess we all are a bit tired. So yeah, I'm not sure.
I would call it a success. I mean, I think you created a confusion. I think there's something brilliant that was created here. And the commentary and how you characterize it now in a way that is somewhat, you know, a certain misgiving you express. I don't know. I think something was very, very much achieved. At least for me.
I'm glad to hear that. You know, yeah, yes, because yeah, I didn't. I mean, I always had the thought like, okay, you know, the whole thing has the score, but it was just because some of the questions were kind of pointing towards like, okay, there's this other part that, yeah. So now you have a very specific, concrete realization of the other part. So at least you have the whole picture to a certain extent, whatever that means. Even though, yeah, it's quite a special setting to do this. I would have loved to do that in person, but I guess you all are in very different parts of the world. But I think it's worth always exploring the Zoom possibilities. Would you like to just maybe finish with a round, if you feel like, just to, you know, whatever, you know, just if you want to just say some final whatever things. Or questions or whatever, you know, just maybe to finish this off.
Or like a Platonic dialogue, we could just end it right there, and you couldn't have a better success by that measure. Fizzled out. That was brilliant.
I liked a lot the article by Sylvia Wynter. I'm very grateful to have that reference.
Hi.
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 I sorry, I don't know if it's gonna put my video on or not. I've got what is basically state load shedding, electricity cuts. I was gonna say thank you for the opportunity of this, because it again put me face to face with my ego, because it's kind of that performance anxiety that comes up when you suddenly feel like you're either having to perform or you're having to be authentic, and it's kind of that internal struggle that kind of comes up for me. And I think that is sometimes the meaning, there isn't meaning, but there's embodiment. And I think even if it's Zoom, there can be a form of embodiment if one is authentic in the moment to oneself. And similarly, I think death to self, it's an opportunity for death to self, which, or death to ego in these kinds of spaces. And I think that's always a good reminder. And I think there is something beyond that. I don't know what it is, like it hasn't, I don't know if it's even possible to get to death to self, but I think there is something there that could be meaningful. And yeah, and meaning is always, and I think meaning in and of itself is also something that could be dissected, because you know, the way that we interpret meaning isn't necessarily what meaning could be. I mean, meaning could be completely different if we feel it in an embodied way, which we might not be aware of. Yeah, I don't know, but there's, I was very, I kind of like, when I realized it was what we were going to do, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so exciting, but both, I'm not sure if I can let go enough. And I feel like many times in these kinds of spaces, you just need more time to kind of warm up to it, and also to kind of get comfortable, because there's a lot of vulnerability that is in part of that space. And I think sometimes you need kind of like the externalized be animals for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And, you know, and then it's something that's not you, or something that's external to you, but you kind of get into the play state, which I think when we intellectualize things, we lose a bit. But the balance is so important between, you know, the concept and the actioning, and the actioning sometimes can feel very ridiculous, but it's so important because it's the doing, not just the thinking. But again, yes, sorry, I'm rambling. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Kind of interesting. The way that I feel, it's like, you know, if we're thinking about the John Cage silence project and the way in which this concept relates to it, I feel like I'm in a state of kind of quietude at this moment, but it's like this like kind of hyper-focused quietude. Like after this, I'm gonna go like run a mile and like smoke a pack of cigarettes, you know, to blow it off, you know, like, which is like it's much different than like the serenity type silence that I think John Cage is talking about, right? Or is it? That's the, you know, that's another question. It's interesting to think of John Cage as like a hyper intense kind of person too, which is which, you know, he probably was in some ways, but as the way in which he presented himself, very soft-spoken, very smart. Cunningham as the less severe of that couple of individuals.
Yeah, I mean, I must say that I find silence extremely productive. I think it can amplify perception and accelerate thinking, and that's certainly what in the score, what we try to do is, yeah, like allow silence to breathe, because it's certainly something is going on in my experience.
I was wondering, Mattin, if you have any encounter with Paulino Oliveros deep listening exercises and works.
Yeah. In fact, I often use them. I'm both excited by them and influenced by them and critical of them. So it's a bit of, but I think they're extremely powerful. And this idea of bringing meditation and listening and, you know, like a kind of studies of listening, but in practical terms, it's a very powerful thing to do. And I guess, yeah, I guess I'm interested in a different form of listening, which has to do with trying to listen to the structural conditioning. Yeah, I mean, it's so the main difference will be that while maybe I actually don't know if she actually says this, but, you know, like, I mean, many of the listening exercises do generate a Paulino Oliveros listening exercises that have a kind of, they bring a sense of harmony often. And for, you know, the listening that I guess I'm interested is that which allow us to listen to the noise that we already have in our minds, you know, the psychic noise, you know, just to let it breathe and give it a space to, you know, to deal with it, to confront it face to face. But, you know, I mean, there is room for everything, you know, it can be, you know, and there is times for every, you know, sometimes you just need, you know, so I find that extremely helpful, you know, even though yeah, I would like to try to complement it, you know, this kind of, you know, the exercises that Paulino Oliveros is doing with maybe this other form of listening, which is actually giving room to the mental noise. But yeah, they're influential, powerful, but maybe this idea of deep listening is maybe I have problems with it, while at the same time I think it's extremely helpful. And the practice itself, you know, I've been you know, experiencing a couple of workshops lately of it. They're always worth it, even though sometimes they can maybe get too much into the, you know, like kind of almost therapeutical kind of side to it, that, you know, sometimes I have problems with it, sometimes I need it. Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed and got a lot out of the conversations and your comments, so, you know, I really appreciate it.